Okay, so we're diving deep into Stoicism today, but not like, a dusty history lesson.
Right.
You want the practical stuff, the tools for a better life.
Exactly.
And the listener has provided some great material for this with the Daily Stoic.
Yeah, this book, it really does feel like a manual for living. A guide to applying those ancient principles to modern challenges.
And it's clearly stood the test of time. There's a quote here from Schopenhauer describing Stoicism as the highest point man can attain by reason alone.
Wow.
High praise indeed.
Yeah.
But why are we still turning to these guys for wisdom centuries later?
Because they were grappling with the same fundamental human challenges that we face today. Jealousy, anxiety, fear, the desire for things we can't control. The Stoics had a framework for navigating these timeless traps.
And it's amazing to think that these ideas resonated not just with philosophers, but with figures like George Washington, who literally shaped a nation, and Theodore Roosevelt, who charged up San Juan Hill.
Yeah.
These were people of action.
People of action.
Not just contemplation.
And that's the beauty of Stoicism. It's not about withdrawing from the world. It's about engaging with it more effectively.
Okay.
And it all starts with understanding those three interconnected pillars that Marcus Aurelius talks about: perception, action, and will.
Right. He calls them essential for navigating each present moment, but how do they actually work together?
Yeah.
It seems like our perceptions can be pretty unreliable sometimes.
Absolutely. That's why the Stoics place so much emphasis on training our perception, on using reason to see things more clearly, because how we perceive a situation dictates how we act, and our actions over time shape our will, our character, our very selves.
So it's not about suppressing emotions entirely, but about choosing how we respond to them.
Exactly.
About using reason as a guide.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we don't always have control over what happens to us, but we always have control over how we react.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. The book uses this anecdote about F. Scott Fitzgerald being envious of the wealthy, thinking they had it all figured out.
Hemingway later poked fun at this, saying, yes, they have more money.
It's a perfect example of how we can get caught in the trap of external validation, of craving things outside our control. And that trap, as the Stoics understood, often leads to unhappiness. Think about it. How much of what you crave, that new phone, that promotion, that recognition, is truly within your control?
That's a great question for all of us to consider. And it highlights the Stoic dichotomy of control, right? This idea of focusing on what we can influence, primarily our own thoughts and actions.
Exactly. Because when we focus on what we can control, we reclaim our power. We move from being victims of circumstance to becoming active participants in shaping our own lives.
But how does that play out in everyday life? I mean, it's easy to say focus on what you can control, but what does that actually look like?
Well, let's take that example of being stuck in traffic. You can't control the traffic, but you can control how you respond to it. Instead of getting stressed and frustrated, you could choose to use that time to listen to a podcast, practice mindfulness, or simply enjoy the scenery. So it's about choosing a more empowering response rather than letting external events dictate your mood.
Exactly. And it applies to so many other areas of life.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with a difficult coworker, for example, you can't control their behavior, but you can control your reaction to it. You can choose to engage calmly, to set boundaries, or to simply let it go.
This reminds me of that story about Cato the Younger choosing to wear rough clothing even though he could afford the finest robes.
Right. Cato understood the power of voluntary discomfort. He knew that by intentionally experiencing discomfort, you build resilience. It's like a muscle. You train it so you're less likely to be thrown off when discomfort arises unexpectedly.
It's like those popular trends of cold showers and intermittent fasting. We're rediscovering these ancient Stoic practices. But what's the underlying benefit?
By exposing ourselves to discomfort intentionally, we're essentially inoculating ourselves against it. We're training our minds to handle difficult situations with greater equanimity.
Okay, this next part I think you can really help unpack. The sources keep coming back to this idea of turning adversity into advantage, like Muggsy Bogues being the shortest player in the NBA.
Right.
How does that become a strength? It seems like such a disadvantage.
Bogues is a fantastic example of how what we perceive as a weakness can actually be a strength. He didn't let his height define him. Instead, he used it to develop incredible speed and ball handling skills, becoming one of the most memorable players in NBA history.
So it's about changing your perspective on challenges, looking for those hidden opportunities. Just like Roosevelt overcoming polio or Mandela, finding dignity, even in prison, they didn't let their circumstances define them.
And it connects to that Stoic practice of premeditation of evils, where you mentally rehearse potential setbacks so you're not caught off guard. Imagine those worst-case scenarios, not to dwell on them, but to prepare for them to take away their power.
So not pessimism, but realistic optimism. Acknowledging that life throws curveballs and the best way to handle them is to be prepared. But how do we even start to build that kind of resilience? Are there specific practices the Stoics recommend?
Absolutely. The sources you provided highlight a number of incredibly valuable practices. Things like negative visualization, the dichotomy of control, focusing on the present moment.
Right, but how do we make these more than just concepts? How do we actually apply them in our daily lives?
That's where the real work of Stoicism begins. It's about taking these principles and making them a habit, weaving them into the fabric of our daily lives.
So it's not just about reading about Stoicism, it's about living it. But that can feel daunting.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, a good starting point is to choose just one of those practices and commit to trying it out for a week. See how it affects your thinking, your emotional responses, your interactions with the world. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. And that's where those specific practices come in, providing a way to train your mind, just as you would train your body.
Yeah, because you can't just tell yourself to be more resilient. It takes practice. The sources actually use a really powerful military analogy for this. Something about hard winter training.
Ah, yes. The Stoics drew a lot of parallels from the military, didn't they? Before modern warfare, armies used to basically take the winter off because campaigning was so brutal. But that downtime wasn't for relaxing, it was for preparing.
So it's not just about resting up, it's about actively getting ready for the next challenge.
Yeah, exactly. They used those months to repair equipment, drill formations, toughen themselves up for the next campaign. The Stoics saw this as a metaphor for life. We should use periods of relative calm to prepare ourselves for inevitable challenges.
Don't wait for a crisis to hit to start developing your coping mechanisms. Build that mental and emotional resilience now. But how?
The Stoics offer a range of practices to do just that. Things like negative visualization, where you imagine potential setbacks to prepare for them mentally.
I have to admit that one sounds a bit counterintuitive. Why would you want to dwell on bad stuff happening?
Because it's not about being pessimistic. It's about being prepared. The more we familiarize ourselves with potential difficulties, the less likely we are to be emotionally overwhelmed when they occur. Think of it like rehearsing for a play. If you've practiced your lines and know what to expect, you'll be less likely to freeze up on stage.
So instead of being blindsided by challenges, we're mentally prepared for them.
Exactly. And the more you practice handling these mental curveballs, the more confident and adaptable you'll become in real life.
That reminds me of the story about Seneca being exiled by the emperor. Instead of freaking out, he saw it as an opportunity to focus on his writing and philosophy. Talk about turning lemons into lemonade.
That's a perfect illustration of Stoic principles in action. Instead of lamenting his misfortune, he used it to further his personal development. It raises an important question for all of us. How do we react when faced with adversity? Do we let it define us, or do we find a way to use it to our advantage?
We all face those moments. Job loss, a health issue, even just a frustrating day. But the Stoics remind us that we always have a choice in how we respond.
And choosing a Stoic response doesn't mean suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine. It's about using reason to guide our actions, even in the midst of difficult circumstances.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. It's about acknowledging the difficulty, but choosing to focus on what you can control, even if it's just your attitude.
Precisely. It's about finding that inner strength, that resilience to keep moving forward even when things are tough.
That brings us to another Stoic practice that seems so simple, yet is so hard, focusing on the present moment. I'm a master of replaying past mistakes and worrying about things that haven't even happened yet.
It's a challenge we all face, isn't it? But the Stoics were right. The past is gone and the future is uncertain. The only thing we truly have is this present moment.
So our power lies in choosing how we engage with this present moment rather than letting our minds wander.
Exactly. And this connects back to that dichotomy of control. We can't change what's already happened, and we can't guarantee what will happen in the future. But we can choose how we think, feel, and act right now in this moment.
I'm starting to see how all these Stoic principles fit together. It's like a puzzle where each piece connects to create a bigger picture of a more resilient and fulfilling life.
That's the beauty of Stoicism.
Yeah.
It's not just a collection of random sayings. It's a coherent philosophy offering a path to living well even when things are tough.
And it's not some unattainable ideal either. The sources emphasize that Stoicism is for everyone, not just philosophers or emperors.
Right. It's about those small daily choices that align with our values. Choosing a reasoned response over an emotional reaction, focusing on what we can control, finding opportunities for growth even in challenging situations.
It's about choosing to be the best version of ourselves no matter what life throws our way. Speaking of challenges, the book has this interesting point about how much time people waste doing things they feel they have to do.
Ah, yes, the trap of perceived obligations. It's a subtle form of slavery, isn't it? We often feel bound by expectations, social pressures, or even our own ingrained habits.
It's like we're on autopilot going through the motions without really questioning why we're doing what we're doing.
And that lack of awareness can lead to a life that feels unfulfilling, even if it looks successful on the outside. We chase after things we think we should want, that bigger house, the fancier car, without asking if those things will actually make us happy.
It's like being stuck in that goodie jar, reaching for too much and ending up with nothing.
A perfect analogy. The Stoic solution is to let go of some of those desires to simplify our wants and needs. It can be incredibly liberating to release that attachment to things we can't control and focus on what truly matters.
I've definitely felt that sense of freedom when I've simplified my life, decluttered my possessions, or let go of a goal that was causing me stress.
It's a powerful reminder that true happiness often lies in less, not more.
So we've covered training our minds, managing desires, but the Stoics were also big on action. There's this quote from Seneca that really grabbed me. Philosophy is not a parlor trick. It's for shaping the soul and guiding action.
Seneca was all about the practical application of philosophy. He saw it as a tool for navigating life's complexities, not just an intellectual exercise. And that's clear in all the examples your sources provide, from historical figures like George Washington to everyday people facing everyday challenges.
It's about finding wisdom and resilience in every situation, no matter who you are or what you do.
Exactly. And it's about those small daily choices aligning with our values and contributing to a life well lived.
Okay, there's this part about choosing your mentors wisely that really stood out to me. It says, we can truly choose whose children we'd like to be. What do they mean by that?
It's a reminder that we have the power to shape our own character by choosing who we learn from and emulate. We can build our own philosophical family tree by seeking out the wisdom of those who have come before us.
So it's about being mindful of who we allow to influence our thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
Precisely. We should choose our mentors and companions, wisely seeking out those who embody the virtues we admire. And it's not just historical figures, but also the people we surround ourselves with today.
This next part is a bit tricky. The book talks about accepting what we can't control, using the language of binding our wishes to the will of God. But it doesn't sound like a strictly religious thing.
You're right. It's more about recognizing that there are forces larger than ourselves at play in the universe. The Stoics call this nature, and they believed that aligning ourselves with the natural order of things was essential for happiness.
So it's about letting go of the illusion that we can control everything and accepting that sometimes things just happen.
Exactly. And that acceptance can be incredibly liberating, can it? When we surrender to what is nosing, we free ourselves from the constant struggle against reality.
It reminds me of that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
A beautiful expression of the Stoic mindset. And speaking of things we can't always control, in the book mentions how much weight we often give to the opinions of others compared to our own self-estimation.
The trap of external validation. It's so tempting to seek approval from others, even if it means compromising our own values. I know I've done things just to impress people I didn't even like.
But the Stoics remind us that true validation comes from within. It's about living in accordance with our own principles, not seeking approval from others.
Being true to ourselves, even if it means going against the crowd.
Exactly. And that requires courage and self-awareness, knowing our own values and having the strength to stand by them, even when it's unpopular.
This next bit caught my attention. Silence is strength. They compare talking too much to a leaky pot draining our energy.
What a vivid analogy. The Stoics believed we should choose our words carefully, speaking only when necessary and avoiding gossip or idle chatter.
It's tough in today's world of constant communication and social media. We're expected to have an opinion on everything.
But we've lost the value of silence, of reflection, of just listening. The Stoics believed silence was essential for clarity of thought and for preserving our energy for what truly matters.
Okay, they're big on self-control, but they're not saying we should be emotionless robots, right?
Right. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about understanding and managing them, using reason to guide our emotional responses rather than letting our emotions control us.
So if you're feeling angry, the Stoic approach isn't to pretend you're not angry, but to ask, why am I feeling this way? Is this anger serving me? Is there a more constructive way to respond?
Exactly. It's about being mindful of our emotions and choosing how we respond to them, rather than being ruled by them.
This one really hit home for me. The book talks about how we often overestimate the happiness of others, imagining they have it all figured out while we're struggling.
The illusion of the perfect life, especially in the age of social media where everyone's presenting their highlight reel. But appearances can be deceiving. Everyone faces challenges. Everyone experiences pain and disappointment.
It's like that saying, don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides.
Precisely. We don't know what's going on in other people's lives, and focusing on their perceived happiness only takes away from our own.
This next one sounds intense. Premeditation of evil.
The name is traumatic, but the practice is very practical. It's about mentally rehearsing for potential setbacks so you're not caught off guard. Not dwelling on negativity, but being mentally prepared.
Like if I have a big presentation, I could imagine things going wrong. Tech issues, a tough question, even forgetting my notes.
Exactly. It's like exposure therapy, taking away the power of fear and uncertainty by facing them head on, turning what ifs into even ifs.
The sources also place a lot of emphasis on death, but it's not morbid exactly.
Right. The Stoics were acutely aware of life's impermanence. They saw that awareness not as something to fear, but as something to embrace.
They talk about death being like the final scene in a play, inevitable and not within our control.
And by accepting that reality, we can free ourselves to live more fully in the present moment.
There's a quote from Seneca that really stuck with me. "You are afraid of dying, but come now. How is this life of yours anything but death?"
What a powerful provocation. It challenges us to consider whether we're truly living or merely existing. If we're so consumed by the fear of death that we're not truly engaging with life, then are we really alive?
It's a wake-up call reminding us that our time is limited and we should make the most of it. Focus on what truly matters, living virtuously, serving others, pursuing our path with courage and integrity.
It's about living a life worthy of our human potential.
You know, I found it interesting that the book points out how we often neglect our own personal development, putting careers or possessions above our own souls.
It's so easy to get caught up in the external world that we neglect our inner lives. We're busy building our resumes, but forgetting to build our character.
But the Stoics saw the cultivation of our character as the most important work we can do.
Absolutely. They believed that virtue was the key to happiness and fulfillment, and that virtue wasn't something you were born with. It was something you had to develop through practice and effort.
So not about being perfect, but about striving to be better.
Exactly. And that requires us to be honest with ourselves about our shortcomings and make a conscious effort to improve, engage in self-reflection, seek out wisdom, and practice those virtues in our daily lives.
So we've talked about virtue, but it's not just about being a good person in your head. It's about putting those principles into practice.
Absolutely. Stoicism is not a philosophy of passivity. It's about taking those principles of perception and will and putting them into action in the real world.
It's about being a good person, making a contribution, living a life of virtue, making a difference in the world, however small that difference may be.
Precisely. And doing so with courage, integrity, and compassion.
Okay, we've covered a lot of abstract concepts, but how do we actually apply these Stoic principles in our daily lives? It's easy to nod along, but putting it into practice is another matter entirely.
It is a challenge. But the Stoics emphasize daily reflection, taking time each day to review your actions and thoughts and ask yourself, how could I have done better?
A personal performance review for your soul.
Exactly. Taking stock of your progress and identifying areas for improvement.
And not beating yourself up for mistakes, but learning from them and moving forward.
It's about self-awareness and commitment to continuous improvement.
The sources also recommend journaling.
Yes. Writing down your thoughts, reflections, and observations can be incredibly powerful for personal growth. It helps you clarify your thinking process, emotions, and track your progress.
Journaling has helped me work through challenging situations or just get my thoughts out of my head.
It's a way to externalize those internal struggles and gain a fresh perspective.
So reflection and journaling are great for self-improvement, but what about applying Stoic principles in how we treat others?
Well, one of the core Stoic virtues is justice. Treating others with fairness and respect.
Being mindful of how our actions affect others and striving to do what's right even when it's difficult.
Exactly. And that includes everything from being honest in our dealings to speaking up against injustice.
The sources also talk about forgiveness.
Yes. The Stoics knew that holding on to anger and resentment only hurts us in the end. They encouraged forgiveness, not because others deserve it, but because we deserve peace of mind.
So it's not about condoning bad behavior, but about releasing ourselves from the burden of anger.
It's a powerful act of self-care.
Okay, I'm curious about this. The book mentions the Stoic concept of indifference. That seems a bit counterintuitive, especially in a world that values passion and enthusiasm.
It can be a tough concept to grasp. Stoic indifference doesn't mean apathy or lack of feeling. It's about recognizing that true happiness doesn't depend on external things.
So it's about not being attached to outcomes or possessions.
Precisely. It's about finding contentment in the present moment, regardless of our circumstances.
Sounds a bit like that Buddhist concept of non-attachment.
You're right. There are many parallels between Stoicism and Buddhism in their emphasis on mindfulness, acceptance, and non-attachment.
I'm starting to see how Stoic indifference could be a powerful tool for navigating life's ups and downs. Choosing to focus on what we can control, our own attitude and actions, rather than getting caught up in external circumstances.
It can be incredibly liberating. When we release our attachment to outcomes, we free ourselves to act with greater courage and integrity.
It's about finding that inner peace and resilience that can't be shaken by external events.
Exactly. And that's a state of mind worth striving for.
The sources also talk about living within our control.
That's a timeless principle. The Stoics understood that much of what happens in life is outside our direct control. We can't control the weather, the economy, or other people's actions.
But it's so easy to get caught up in those things, worrying about things we can't change, or getting frustrated by situations beyond our influence.
The Stoics remind us that our energy is best spent focusing on what we can control, our own thoughts, actions, and reactions.
So it's about recognizing the difference between what we can influence and what we can't, and choosing to focus on the former.
It's exactly. Accepting the things we can't change, and choosing to act effectively within the realm of what we can.
That shift in focus from worrying to taking action can be so empowering.
It is. It's about reclaiming our agency and increasing our effectiveness.
I can see how this idea of living within our control applies to so many areas of life, careers, relationships, even our own well-being.
Absolutely. It's a principle that can guide our decision-making, our emotional responses, and our interactions with the world.
So it's all about focusing on what we can influence, accepting what we can't, and choosing to act with integrity and purpose.
Precisely. And that's a powerful recipe for living a life of resilience, meaning, and fulfillment.
And that brings us back to this idea from the beginning, Stoicism being the highest point of human reasoning. It's not just about feeling better, it's about thinking better.
It's fascinating that the Stoics believed reason was our most powerful tool for navigating life. They saw emotions as valid but potentially misleading if not guided by reason.
So it's not about denying our emotions. It's about using reason to understand and manage them.
Exactly. And recognizing that our thoughts shape our reality. If we let ourselves be ruled by fear, anger, or jealousy, those emotions will cloud our judgment and lead to poor decisions.
Kind of like that saying, you can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf.
Exactly. Stoicism is about developing that inner surfer, the ability to ride the waves of life with skill and grace, even when the seas are rough.
And the sources bring up another powerful analogy.
Yeah.
This idea of life being like a play.
Ah, yes, the Stoic metaphor of life as a stage. They believed we're all actors in a grand cosmic drama, each playing our assigned roles.
And our job isn't to complain about the role or try to rewrite the script, but to play it to the best of our ability.
Precisely. Just like a good actor, we should approach our roles with commitment, integrity, and a willingness to embrace the challenges they bring.
And remember that whether the play is long or short, tragic or comic, it will eventually end.
The Stoics were very aware of life's impermanence and saw that awareness not as something to fear, but as something to embrace.
Knowing our time is limited can inspire us to live more fully in the present moment.
It reminds us not to waste time on things that don't matter, and to focus our energy on what does you feel. Living virtuously, serving others, and pursuing our path with courage and integrity.
We've talked about some heavy stuff today, death, adversity, self-control. But Stoicism isn't about being a gloomy philosopher. It's about living a good life.
Absolutely. And for the Stoics, a good life was one lived in accordance with nature, in harmony with reason, and in service to others.
So it's not about denying pleasure or avoiding challenges. It's about finding joy and meaning in the midst of them.
Exactly. It's about embracing life fully with all its ups and downs and finding a way to thrive even in the face of adversity.
And using our reason to guide our actions, to choose virtue over vice, and to make a positive contribution to the world.
It's about living a life worthy of our human potential.
Well said. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about Stoicism?
Because Stoicism offers a path to greater resilience, wisdom and fulfillment, no matter who you are or what challenges you face. It's a philosophy that can help you navigate the complexities of modern life with greater clarity, purpose, and peace of mind.
It's about taking responsibility for your own happiness, finding freedom within constraints, and turning obstacles into opportunities for growth.
It's about living a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling.
I think the sources summed it up perfectly. Stoicism is about being a good person and pursuing your purpose with courage and integrity.
And that's a journey worth embarking on.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into Stoicism, but I want to leave you with one final thought. What if instead of running from your fears or trying to distract yourself from negative emotions, you lean into them? What might you learn about yourself and your own strength?
That's a powerful question. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with discomfort and to explore the potential for growth that lies within those challenging emotions.
It's about recognizing that our struggles can be our greatest teachers if we have the courage to face them. I encourage you to continue exploring Stoicism. Read more, reflect on these ideas, and see how you can apply them to your own life.
And remember, the journey to a good life is a marathon, not a sprint. Start small, be patient with yourself, and keep moving forward one step at a time.
That's all for our deep dive on Stoicism. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.